The radio in 5, 4, 3.
And we are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider Sports Talk 1050 WTKA online at WTK.com. Sam Webb, Mr. Ira Weintraub on the other side. And you know what we do in the 9 o'clock hour on Thursdays? We talk to our boys, our brothers from the other mothers, friends from the MGoBlog Roundtable joining us this morning like they do every single week. Our good friend Seth Fisher is back. Seth, how are you this morning?
I'm good. My feature writers are too good because I don't normally can cut their articles down a little bit and then have enough room for a big long round table at the end of the book. And the round table is like 3 pages right now because I can't cut any of it. You guys are too good. Darn you, Craig. Your article's awesome
no,
now.
your rewrite is really good, Seth. But so we're not doing that this year. No roundtable at the end.
No, we're doing a round table, but it's like 3 pages. It's gonna be like,
okay.
what's the prediction? Hey, we're all gonna win. Go.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
And then that other voice you hear, you know it very, very well, is one Mr. Craig Ross. So before we get into the topics throughout the day or throughout the hour, want to give you the opportunity to respond to Mike Spath yesterday, who I posed the question to Mike about you. The premise was based on something that you said, Craig, and that was, talking about the movement, players jumping around and how it's affecting your fandom. And the question to Mike was, what does he see as a remedy? Does he see any relief coming in terms of the portal, or maybe when it comes to NIL and federal legislation, or did he see neither thing getting better and fans being affected by those things, keep going along the path that they're going along now?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he said, hey, for people who feel like Craig, I think that they're full of it. I don't think they're going to feel like that as long as their teams get out there and do well. So to that, you say what, Craig?
Well, just that I have no problem with NIL. As you know, if Mike Morris can do advertising for Mike Morris, the attorney, I love it. I mean, that's fine. That should be within his rights to sell his name, image, and likeness and do work along those lines and be compensated for it. And drag Blake Corum and a couple other kids in with him to those ads. I'm all in, and it doesn't affect my fandom at all. Pay for play tends to dampen my enthusiasm a bit because it makes the game professional. And as much as I've been, say, a Cleveland Guardians fan my whole life, and now that I'm a Detroit Lions fan, it doesn't mean I won't watch those games.
The Guardians to play baseball.
I know, but I'm not a Browns fan anymore. I can't root for the Browns anymore. They've been too douchey for too long for me to root for them. And so, I mean, when you draft Johnny Manziel and bring in what? No, I can't handle it.
I still can't get over the fact that you picked the Lions of all people.
Because I live here. Sam's a Lion fan. I love Sam. Sam's
I'm a Lions fan too.
So
I told you, this is like having your choice of religions and picking Judaism. Like, there are other religions that you could choose that are easier than this.
Yeah, I got you on point. But in any event, so, but I'll never have the enthusiasm for the Guardians or the Lions that I do for Michigan sports. And partly because it's professional and there's a certain mercenary element to professionalism that just makes it less interesting to me. And I'm not saying that should be the same for anyone else. I mean, here's a parable. Here's a story. And maybe I've told this one before, but it's one I like, and it's portable. There's a guy. He's a great gourmet. He's had every food, every dish that in the world, except one. He's never had Tibetan peach pie. And the reason why he's never had Tibetan peach pie, because it's only sold in one place, a small restaurant on the side of a mountain in the Himalayas. And, obviously very difficult and expensive to get there. So he saves up his money. He goes a long, long time saving and planning and getting in shape. So he finally does it. Takes the long flight to Tibet, hires a Sherpa guide, goes up the mountain, finds the restaurant, and he sits down and he goes, "This has been a long trip for me. There's just one thing I want. I want a slice of your Tibetan peach pie." and the waiter says, "Sorry, we're out." And so the guy says, "Okay, I'll take apple." And so that's sort of my vision of NIL and pay for play. I'll take Apple. It isn't the world that I exactly want to be in, but it's one I can live in. And that's
basically you don't have any other option. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I don't have options.
You want pie, that's what you got to eat.
Right.
Is that what the point of that story is? Because they used to tell that story at camp.
Yeah.
They used to tell that story every year at camp, and then everyone would just burst out laughing. And the joke was on the new people at camp who'd never heard the story before, and would be like, so start laughing along too because everyone's laughing. And that was what the gag was. And the story was really long too. Like he had this whole like trip up the mountain and down the mountain, and like.
Well, I could have stretched it out for an hour, but I didn't think.
And then they come to the punchline, and then like, will peach pie do? And everyone just loses it.
Yeah.
That jumped out at me. I was trying to figure out where he's going, and then I've never heard the Himalayas called the Himalayas before. So
I don't know. How do you pronounce it? Brian pronounces everything wrong, so he probably knows how not to pronounce it.
I pronounced that correctly.
Okay.
I've read a lot of Wikipedia articles about mountaineering disasters. So
all right.
So,
one last thing on this, and I will admit that even though some days I'd like to live in a different world, that nostalgia is treacherous. And as soon as you get too burned into nostalgia, then you're going to realize you no longer own your future, somebody else does. And I think that's something that you could see in the Weimar Republic or even today, that you never want to get too much of a lament for the past is not a good thing. Anyway, I'm done.
I think that was the point of Mike's. I think he was stuck in the past, right? But
yeah,
again, I want to give you the opportunity to respond, and we got Himalayas and Tibetan pie. There you go. All right, let's go over. Welcome, Brian Cook. How you doing this morning, man?
Good. I'm sorry about last week. I turned off all my alarms because it was the summer, and I should have turned all but one off.
Hey, it happens, man, especially when you have kids, right?
Yeah.
All right. So listen, NBA draft tonight.
Yeah.
If I had told you guys during the season that the first player off the board from the Big Ten in the NBA draft would be Kobe Buffkin, would you believe that to be the case? Because that's the projection right now, that Kobe Buffkin will be the Big Ten's first player selected in tonight's draft.
Well, yeah, he's pretty good at basketball. I mean, he's 6'4". He's young. He's equivalent. He's a freshman basically by age.
Yeah.
And for him to have that kind of season as an age equivalent freshman, with the wingspan, the height he brings, I think that it's pretty obvious that he should be a lottery pick. And it was like late in the season, like I was like, "What? This seems reversed. Like Jet Howard does not seem like a lottery pick. He's got huge flaws in his game, but he's a 6'8" shooter, so I see he's a first rounder." And the way that it's kind of shaken out makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, more than 6'4", by the way. He's 6'4" with like no shoes on, with his feet on the floor, and like it's still 6'4" and change. So like we've been quoting him that forever, and we've been doing him a major disservice because most guys his height get called 6'6". That's what he is.
Yeah. I mean, Sam and I mean, you may recall on this show, Sam and I have talked Buffkin up from day one, and in his freshman year, we were both saying this guy is, even when he wasn't playing, this guy's going to be good. This guy's going to be good. And then last year, even at the beginning of the season, even when he wasn't really peaking yet, we kept saying this guy's going to be good. And finally, I think he got there. And so I'm not surprised at all. The two things about Kobe that I like, one is he's really smart. I don't know if you've talked to him, Sam, but I've talked to him a couple times. He's a really smart kid. He's self-aware. And when I talked to him last year about what he was going to do this year, he said defense. He goes, I got to improve my defense. I mean, if I'm going to stay on the court, I have to become a better player. So I'm just spending the whole summer, working on my conditioning, working on my feet. And so this kid has huge upside, huge ceiling as far as I'm concerned. And with the right team, I think he'll really work out. So no, I'm not surprised at all. Jet has a lot more questions in my mind.
Yeah, man, it's interesting because obviously Jet was getting a lottery mention during the year. I remember talking to a coach, and we were having this discussion. He was like, Kobe going to the league, boy, man, I just don't know if it'll be worth it because no one's talking about him in the lottery. Jet, I get. And I was like, well, I wouldn't be surprised if a team would take Kobe first because Kobe is more complete. Now, Ira made the point based on his long relationship with the late great John Thompson. And Ira, I'll let you tell this. What did John Thompson tell you about, skill and taking a guy in the draft?
He says you have to start with something that you do elite first, and then you can have one elite skill, and then you can build around that. But if you do a whole bunch of things good and you don't have anything that's elite, you aren't going to build a great player out of that. That's essentially what he said.
Right. So I think Jet's elite skill is he can shoot that rock. He can shoot that basketball. And that might entice some team enough that say, okay, I'm going to value his one elite skill over Kobe's. He's just all around a better player right now. He actually plays defense. He puts it on the deck better right now, right? He can obviously get to the rim and create for others. We start to see that. So he does more in more categories, but he does not have that one skill that you look at and you say, man, if I draft him, I know he's going to be able to do that right now. Jet has that, and I wonder if that'll elevate him in the eyes of some NBA teams.
Yeah, people. That's been a thing that people in all drafts and all sports have been saying forever, right? That like, okay, take the elite skill and then develop the rest, right? But go and look and see how well that works out. The reason why 5 stars are 5 stars and 3 stars are 3 stars. Sometimes you get a 3-star who develops, and you get that guy, and that turns into Chase Winovich, and that's an amazing player, right? But the reason Rashawn Gary is a 5-star to start with is he's already good at all those things. And sometimes good at everything is a very, very good thing because you're not going to have every coach just believes they're the best and they can teach all the pieces that they're missing. And the fact of the matter is you can't. Sometimes the reason they don't play defense well is they don't play defense well. Sometimes the reason they don't shoot well is they're not good shooters. And the idea that you can always fix these players is where a lot of bad draft picks happen, I think.
Right.
Yeah. Seth, let me just quickly add, it's not that you fix that, is that if you only have that one elite skill and you don't add anything else, you at least have an elite skill. That's Big John's point.
Yeah, I mean, so I was reading Sam Vecini's draft preview for The Athletic, which is literally hundreds of pages. I just read the 2 Michigan ones. And one thing jumped out when he was talking about Jet Howard is he had a stat where Michigan was something like 7.4 points better with Jet off the floor. So, I mean, that's something that's a huge number. That's like an Austin Davis versus John Teskey number. And all of that goes back to his defense, which is not bad. It is miserable. So, he's got an elite skill, and the kind of stuff that he does on defense is fixable. But you got to question whether he's going to get there, whether he's going to be able to Duncan Robinson up, because Duncan Robinson is an functional NBA defender, which I don't think any of us saw coming. So it's definitely something that's possible for him, but it's an open question. I mean, Duncan Robinson to go in the first round, and as an NBA comp, he's pretty close, right? 6'8" shooter with defensive questions. So, he just has the athletic pedigree that Duncan Robinson never did. So you expect that he might get there, but I understand that there are questions.
Yeah, I will say that Jet did show he could pass the ball. He does have some ability there. He isn't 100% just a shooter, because I think he can pass the ball. But no, his ball handling is not great. His defense is miserable, as Brian points out. And so whether those things, but maybe because of his shooting, there is a high ceiling there, and that someone will decide, yeah, we can teach this guy to play defense. And how about this, to pay attention now and again when he's on the court, because sometimes he just seemed to be not paying any attention.
Yeah,
And
I think you just nailed it. I think you just nailed it, Craig. I mean, everything with Jet is about where he does he focus on those things? Will he prioritize? What does he prioritize?
Yeah,
Because I think Jet is better at putting the ball on the deck than he showed last year. Mitch, we saw flashes of it. Like he had really worked on his ball handling to the point we saw in high school. I was surprised by his ability to kind of run a team a little bit, even in AAU or NBA camp settings. Like he would initiate the offense. I was a little surprised by that. He was adept at getting to the rack to his right. I was a little surprised by that, but he could not go left. We started to see him do some things to his left last year. I'm like, okay, but then it just went away. And his issue that I would see is, man, he would fall in love with that jumper sweet. It's butter, but you can't shoot it all the damn time. And that was his thing. And it wasn't one of those things where he was routinely creating for others either. And then when you don't play defense on top of it, you get the kind of stat that you're talking about. So if he gets with a team that really is like, look, if you're shooting all the time, we got a problem. You know, we gotta work on rounding your game, and you won't be on the floor if you don't play defense, which is kind of a stretch maybe in the NBA. But if they can get him to focus on those things, I think Jet can be a star player. I think he can be a star in the NBA, but it's going to take him being dedicated to improving those skills. Otherwise, he'll just be a specialty guy, a shooter that hangs around the league for a long time. All about which team he lands with, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think the team that he wants to land with is the Miami Heat.
Oh, dude, perfect.
Right? But they already have the test case in Robinson.
Yeah,
you know he's going to be a couple year project before he's going to be playing many minutes for a good team, right? So like they have, and they're long term thinkers. So I think that would be a good landing spot for him. And he's not redundant with Duncan Robinson because everybody needs to shoot, and everybody needs shooters. So I don't really think that those guys overlap at all. So I think he's got a shot. But if you're asking me which guy I think is more likely to be an NBA All-Star, I got Kobe Buffkin.
Yeah, man. I'll close with this and tell me if you guys agree with this. I think that Jet's NBA path is more dependent on who he lands with than Kobe. Yeah. Like Jet getting with the right team is everything. It's the difference between him being a guy in the NBA and having a star-like turn potentially in the NBA. Whereas Kobe, I think wherever he goes, I think we're going to see Kobe be a good NBA player.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I 100% agree with what Brian just said. I mean, Miami is a good place for him, the right place for him. They have a good coaching staff. It's a stable coaching staff. Spoelstra ain't getting fired. Nope. And they will, and you saw what they've done with Duncan Robinson defensively, where he's at least plausible. And Duncan's game has improved in the NBA. I couldn't agree more.
So a couple of questions real quick about obviously Michigan. People are asking, you guys have any clue? I haven't really had a chance to dig into this a lot. How did things turn around with Antonio Reeves in Kentucky like that? I mean, from on one end of the spectrum, you have this contentious, they're standing in the way of him transferring. They're being very, very difficult, to now he's moving back in and going back to Kentucky.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's going on there at all. I mean, for our listeners, I mean, the kid wanted to transfer, but was going to have to sit out a year, right? Regardless of where he chose, because unless he graduated. So he went back to his original school, I think where he went for 3 years, Illinois State, to try and get his degree at Illinois State. Something went south there. I don't know what it was, but it sounds to me like he couldn't get his degree from Illinois State or something. And so he was going back to Kentucky, and Kentucky certainly wants him. But there was been rumors that Kentucky was making it difficult for him, and why you would go back to a place that's making it difficult for you, I don't I don't really know, but it's mysterious, and the reporting on it hasn't been pristine, to say the least. I mean, you would know more about this, Sam, than anyone, I think.
Yeah, man. I look. I was told very, very plainly that for this to even be a consideration for Michigan, he was going to have to be a grad transfer, and absent that, it's not even worth discussing.
Well, that's the same, not just for Michigan, for everyone. Because this would be his second transfer.
Yeah, let's be his second transfer, so that could be an issue. But you can get around that sometimes. Michigan was not going to be able to get him into school unless he was a grad transfer.
Right.
Yeah,
so anyway, who knows? I mean, and it leaves Michigan in, again, the awkward spot where Michigan's sitting with 11 scholarship players by my count right now. I don't hear of anything obvious on the, it's late June. We're going into July, and they're in their short two scholarship guys, which is something I don't ever recall happening.
Yeah, and then the Mulcahy talk. Suddenly, Kentucky is a factor for Mulcahy. There's some Notre Dame buzz here of late. Washington, Gonzaga. I just haven't heard a lot of Michigan with Paul Mulcahy.
Well, the problem with Mulcahy is that Michigan's built a really defensive team, and they need some scoring. And what's Mulcahy leaving is a super defensive team that was just like because that's what he does. He passes and he plays defense, but someone else has got to score. So I don't know if it's the best fit, even though we need a wing, unless Michigan wants to be the team that wins every single game 45-40.
Well, they want to be Rutgers West then, and that's okay. And Mulcahy, I think, can score. I just think his role there has not been that so much. I mean, we've seen him play. I've seen him play a lot. I don't think he's a terrible shooter or a terrible scorer. He just doesn't choose to shoot a lot, and because he's a pass first guy. And I would love Mulcahy at Michigan. I think he's a good basketball player, and I don't think he's a terrible fit for Michigan. But it doesn't sound like he's coming here for whatever reason.
I meant, why would he want to do it?
Oh, I'm sorry. No,
if what you're looking for is a team that can score because you're sick of being on Rutgers.
Yeah, I gotta dig into another question. I'm throwing questions at you that I haven't even thrown at sources yet. But with the developments at West Virginia, you got a lot of vultures kind of circling the carcass a little bit, seeing if they could maybe pull. Because look, that's what they were doing. They were hauling in a pretty good transfer class. Reportedly, they're in the Mulcahy sweepstakes, or at least trying to be some of the remaining assistants. Anything enticing about what West Virginia has in you guys' eyes? Again, and to throw it out, I'm just throwing it out there because I haven't even checked on it yet to see if it's something that Michigan is pursuing. But just a cursory glance at it, what do you guys think of that? Because a lot of schools are looking at West Virginia and saying, hey, okay, let's see who we can grab.
When you were saying vultures circling the carcass, I was thinking you were talking about John Beilein, and then I thought, wait a minute, Beilein's a lot younger than I am. What are the vultures doing to me? And no, I don't know. Do you guys know about West Virginia?
Craig Ross is so old he remembers the bubonic plague.
I know that West Virginia fans are delusional if they think they have a shot in hell at John Beilein.
Well, I think that's true too. I can't imagine Beilein going back to West Virginia. One, they treated him very poorly when he left West Virginia.
Yeah, they sued him.
They sued him, right, and made him pay back like $500,000, which was nonsense. And so I can't imagine that he's feeling too warm and fuzzy about West Virginia at this point. And no. I mean, if he wants to go back to coaching, I think he can get a better job. In fact, I think he can get almost any job that he might want. So he ain't taking West Virginia.
Having a lake house. Imagine having a lake house at Walloon Lake and then going back to live in West Virginia. Yeah. I mean, this seems like never in a million years would I choose to do that if I have a job.
I think Beilein is done, man. I think Beilein falls in this category of coach who retires because he's done, but he still has his hair, so everyone thinks he can coach still. Remember, like this happened with Chuck Daly for years and years. They're like, oh, that guy can still coach.
Daddy Rich. All right. So we'll say I will check on that because I got to, I've been getting questions. Hey, what are they going to look at in West Virginia guys? I will check on that too. We answered your questions about Mulcahy. That's coming in the chat. People want to know about Reeves. That was coming in the chat. There you go. So the short answer to your question about is Michigan done in the portal? I don't know. Pickings are looking really slim, though. We can certainly say that. We got to get to a break. As we do, I want to leave you guys to chew on this for a second. I'm obviously spending a lot of time on Ohio State. They're showing up in all of my podcasts these days. It's crazy to me. They want to come and hear me talk about the Buckeyes. But there was a story on ESPN recently where Heather Dinich made her way down to Columbus, spent some time with the staff down there, and very clearly profiling the pressure that they're under to turn things around as it relates to Michigan. And she sat down with Jim Knowles. And it's just, it strikes me in listening to him. I wonder if you guys are really feeling this. A guy that does not have the answers. A guy that is a little bit shook by what happened. Like, I don't know if he's more shook by the pressure that Michigan put him under in the game, or more shook by the calls from the fans that are coming for him in the aftermath of it. But I'm going to read you some of it coming back, and want to get your opinion on what the future holds for Jim Knowles. I'm not on board with thinking that this is the end of it for Ryan Day if this year doesn't go right, but I am fully on board with this being absolutely it for Jim Knowles if they can't turn it around this year. We'll dig into that on the other side here. MGoBlog Roundtable, Sports Talk 1050, WTKA, The Ticket.
Clear on the radio.
Did you guys see the piece, the Dinich piece?
I did not.
You did not see the Dinich piece.
No.
Check it out, because one of the things that sticks out to me is how after the game, he was telling all their media members about how Michigan made all these great changes. They did all these things different in the second half. I heard from both coaches and players at Michigan, they didn't change anything. So I wonder if this dude knows what he's doing. I'm really questioning his expertise here.
If the thing that he did, I mean, he went a little radical, right? Like he played. I likened to playing without a goalie, right? Because he just brought both safeties down and just asked his players to cover his guys' man. Now, if you have Ohio State's talent and you're going against Michigan, the problem that you're going against Michigan is you got to face Zach Zinner and Olu Latimi every single play, right? And those guys are going to move your dudes out of the way, so you need to add extra value to that. Illinois showed them how to do it. So he goes, well, I'm going to follow what Illinois' blueprint was. It made a certain kind of sense.
That wasn't the Illinois' blueprint, though. The Illinois blueprint was they had a deep safety.
Right.
They had like a DJ Durkin safety.
Yeah.
Playing in the next county. So when something broke for Michigan, they got 30 yards instead of 70.
Right.
So,
I thought Illinois' disguise was outstanding. Like there were times where you could see they confused the shit out of JJ. I mean, the heck out of JJ. And
we're still we're still in shit time right now.
right. They really confused him, and you could see there were times he thought he had man, and they were rolling to a cover two on the snap of the ball. Like they would hold their disguise longer than any team I saw all season. And of course, they mixed in a healthy amount of man coverage in there. And you got to have not only some talented guys, you got to have some high IQ guys back there as well. Ohio State has the talented guys, but either their IQ is low or the coach's IQ is low. But somebody's IQ is not where it needs to be.
Well,
how they would try to play against Michigan.
I tell you what, if I was UFRing the Ohio State defense in this game, I bet you $1 that Lathan Ransom would come in for an all-time record negative.
Yes,
because I'm pretty sure he busted on the Cornelius Johnson touchdown. He got torched by Colston Loveland on his touchdown. He's the guy who missed the tackle on the first Donovan Edwards touchdown, and then he has a guy outside of him on the second Donovan Edwards touchdown who's got the quarterback. He's ripping off the edge. He checks the quarterback. So if you're talking about a high IQ player on that day, Lathan Ransom was not it. And I don't know.
And it's funny you mentioned Lathan Ransom because Devin was ragging on Cam Martinez.
Well, Cam Martinez was a backup.
Yeah.
Cam
Cam
Martinez,
Martinez is the guy that Cornelius Johnson shook on his wide 30 yards open touchdown. That guy was a quarterback from Grand Rapids.
Yeah, and I think that there's no earthly way that's the way that defense was called.
Back on radio in about 10 seconds, guys.
Right. There's no earthly way that this is like, okay, third string safety. Here's you got Cornelius Johnson wherever he goes from the slot. And there's no deep help. That's not what he calls some stupid defense, but he didn't call that.
CJ is like this. Like, hey,
5, 4,
someone over.
3.
Oh my God. All right, we back. Okay, I'm sorry. We're back.
We're still laughing about Cornelius Johnson. We're on the air, man.
All right, well, let me tell you folks, as I get us back on track, listen, Chelsea Lumber's tent sale. Be sure to get on out. Chelsea Lumber, where the home begins. You don't want to miss the annual tent sale. That begins tomorrow and Saturday. It's their once a year clean out event with fantastic products, deeply discounted, including windows, doors, cabinetry, and a wide variety of building materials, plus so much more. They'll have a large selection of beautiful and functional kitchen showroom displays at a fraction of their retail price. This tent sale is first come, first served, no pre-sale. So make sure you make it out to Chelsea Lumber, the Chelsea store, by the way, because they also have locations in Saline and Bridgewater. But Chelsea Lumber store in Chelsea, that is Friday and Saturday. So be sure to make it on out if you can. All right, so let's get to this piece. Heather spent some time down in Columbus. There were a lot of articles this offseason about they're hiring all these big brains to come in and help them figure out Michigan is essentially what it boils down to. But in this piece, they're hyper-focused on the 6 explosive plays against Michigan and the 10 explosive plays against Georgia. And that those were the just like in any game, the explosive plays are probably the difference, right? Well, I mean, this is just all they're focused on, which I find a little bit, if I were them, Ohio State fans, I find a little bit troubling because Michigan left explosive plays on the field, right? Yeah. There are plays there that they just didn't realize that Ohio State didn't defend well at all. But no. So tell me if you think this is evidence of a guy who's just being introspective or evidence of a guy who's shook. So this is him talking about the 6 and 10 explosive plays. He said, quote, "We had some matchup issues, which I blame myself. Got put into positions where the matchup was not in our favor. That's my job to fix that and look out for that. We had some times where we lost our eyes and we didn't execute. I call it eye violations. When the moment gets big, our vision has to get smaller and more condensed. At times we had guys who were doing too much and not focused on their assignment. That goes back to me. Nobody wants to make the critical mistake. They don't want to give up the critical play. That's not how our guys are built. So I have to look at my teaching and the environment." Shook or introspective? What do you think?
Coach speak.
Yeah.
This is coach speak. And I think that what really happened in the Michigan-Ohio State game was they just got beat by a better team. They got beaten up by a better offensive line, and they tried to gamble a lot. Because of the mismatch or the fact that Michigan's offensive line was better than their defensive front, and they got burned. And yeah, I mean, if he had better players, I guess it might have gone better. So what? That's always the case. And so to me, this doesn't feel like anything particularly structural. It feels more like a better offensive team beat them.
Yeah,
that's what it feels like to me.
I mean, to me, that doesn't feel introspective. To me, that feels like CYA. Because I know what happened in that game. I charted that game. Yeah. And you don't need to chart that game to know what happened in that game, right? But I charted it. Yeah. And I think the play that really sticks out to me in this regard is actually the pop pass from Khalil Mullen. And that did not need to be a pop pass, because every Ohio State player was committed to the line of scrimmage before the mesh point. If Michigan had just run straight play action off of that, it's a walk-in touchdown. And that's their whole game plan. And you can't blame, Lathan Ransom, who we talked some crap about in the break. You can't blame him for being hyper aggressive when that's obviously what you were coaching them to do. And so they held Michigan's offense down for a quarter and a half by being insanely aggressive. And when the chickens came home to roost, they didn't have a plan B, because plan B was, okay, what happens next when we back off? Well, Michigan goes on a 14-play touchdown drive, right? Because the only way you're stopping that running game is one of two ways, and that's CJ Stokes not being quite up for the moment, which is fine. He's a true freshman.
Mm-hmm.
Also having free hitters in the box because you're using your safeties. And they could not defend Michigan's ground game with an even box. And even late in the game, when they're trying to, Joel Klatt's in the box saying, this needs to be the best defensive cult series of Jim Knowles' career, what are they doing? They got a 3-man line out there, and they're trying to fool Oluwatimi and Zinter because they're like, oh, we got a guy who's slanting. And that's not going to work. This isn't the Big 12, These offensive linemen aren't just repping pass pro all day. These guys are NFL offensive linemen, and you're expecting that they're not going to be able to pick up on something when you put 3 defensive linemen on the field and you shift them over. It's like the guy doesn't know what's coming. That's naive. And,
I think that this, and I know you guys watched it close too, Craig and Seth. I think this is maybe one of the more egregious examples of coaching malpractice that I've seen. And I think Michigan wins the game anyway, because I agree with you, Craig, just a better team. But I swear they looked at how Illinois played Michigan, and maybe schematically they didn't copy, but in terms of tone of their defensive temperament, they decided to adopt some of that, which is the total antithesis of who they were during the season. I remember watching, because we went back and watched every Ohio State game before that game. And I remember asking both Al and Vance, hey, you know what? Maybe they'll try to do some of this. And both of those guys said, no, you can't change your DNA. It's that's not realistic. Coaching the team, you don't change who you are for one game unless you've been practicing that all season. But Michigan or Ohio State have been a heavy zone team over the course of the year. They weren't this aggressive, super ultra aggressive man team, 0 cover, 0 blitz. They didn't do that a ton. And they come out in this Michigan game, and it's like, what is this? And I think they kind of got a little, or not they, Jim Knowles kind of got a little sugar, little vinegar in there. That got a little happy, thinking that, looking at what Illinois did, thinking that they could go out and duplicate some of that tone and temperament, and got burned as a result. He coached his scheme, not his team. All those guys being in poor position or being overly aggressive. I think I agree with you, Brian. I think that's all on Jim Knowles, and I wonder if he will have learned his lesson this season.
Well, I also wonder how much talent they actually have back there, because the super open Cornelius Johnson touchdown, he's been checked by Cam Martinez, who's a converted quarterback, who's a backup safety. And you look at the NFL draft this year, they have Zach Harrison go in the 3rd round. They have no other defensive players drafted. And I know they get JTT back, but they had Taron Vincent on that field. He's the defensive tackle I'm talking about, who's slanting over, and Zinter just pounds him into next week. He's a UDFA, right? That's their defensive tackle. And, Michigan sends Mozzie Smith the 1st round of the draft, and they get back Chris Jenkins, who might be a 1st rounder next year. Mm-hmm. And you look at Michigan's secondary, they got Mason Graham.
Yeah.
Ohio State has some edge players, but is anyone else on that defense going to get drafted?
Right. And so you raise a great point, man. So Michigan, they're recruiting Bryce West and Aaron Scott heavily. I know you guys follow recruiting, right? Yeah. So top corners, Bryce West, Cleveland Glenville might be back today. We'll see if that actually comes to fruition. And Aaron Scott, the #1 player in the state out of Springfield. Now, it comes from a heavy Buckeye family. Bryce West comes from a heavy Buckeye school. Ohio State could get both of these guys, all right? It's still Ohio State. But this has become much more of a question because of not just Michigan beating them, but how they beat them, and especially with Aaron Scott. He's made it very clear to me. His opinion of Michigan changed dramatically being at that game last year and watching their secondary and kind of asking himself the question, like, man, if I come here, is it going to be like this if I come here? You know, scheme and development am I going to really get developed as a pro? Am I really going to play a pro scheme if I come to Ohio State? Now, Hart may win out in the end, but that started creating some real questions at a real key position for some in-state guys for Ohio State, starting with that game set.
Yeah, man. You know, Michigan's coaching's been better lately. I don't think there's you can't look at the last 2 games and not show that. But Michigan's players are finally on the level of Ohio State's players. And they didn't do it by recruiting the level that Ohio State did. They did it by they developed guys. They found guys. Zach Zinner was not a guy that Ohio State was after, right? And that dude changes your things. Now, once they have that in place, they can get an Oluwatimi and they can finish off some of those spots. And that's what we're seeing them build this team right now. And at the same time, Ohio State just kind of let some things slide. Like they had defensive tackles coming out of their ears, but they also had Rob Landers starting for them, who was a small guy who was not very well recruited, but they scouted him. They realized that he could scrap, he can play, and he caused Michigan a lot of problems when he was on the field against them. And they don't have that guy now. They have all 5 stars. And like Brian says, like JTT, that guy is a dude, and he's going to be dangerous, and they're going to be very good for what they are. But Ohio State's not used to playing teams of the same talent as them. And they've gotten there in the playoffs, and they did well against Georgia because they've gotten a shootout, and that's what you have to do in the playoffs nowadays. You have to play an NFL game. But they were not expecting Michigan to have the same. And I think that Knowles misunderstood the assignment. I think that Ryan Day might misunderstand the assignment. Michigan-Ohio State is not Ohio State's got more talent than Michigan's trying to come and get you, and you just have to outplay. You have to come up with a new strategy for that game. Michigan-Ohio State is, we're going to give you our best game, the best version of ourselves versus the best version of yourself, and we're going to see who's the best team. And once they start looking at it that way, I think it's going to be more of a rivalry again. Right now, Michigan finally understands the assignment. They didn't for a long time. Ohio State's kind of lost the thread a little bit.
Correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so sure Michigan lost the thread. I just think we weren't as good, and no level of coaching was really going to solve that problem. That isn't true anymore. And now I think the talent levels are pretty close, and I think Michigan is better coached. Better coached, has more idea about what they're doing, a better vision, and that's what it comes down. That's what it comes down to. And I think with these coaching staffs, so long as the talent is even, reasonably even, Michigan's going to have a really good chance. And I include this year because I think we're going to be better at offensive line. I think we're going to be better at quarterback. And I think we'll be just as good or better pretty much every place else. So, I mean, I think Ohio State better start thinking that maybe they are going to lose 3 in a row. And I don't think that means they're going to have to fire their coaching staff necessarily, but I think there's going to be angst. That's for sure.
Yeah, I don't think there's any chance that no one gets fired if they lose to Michigan again. I mean, someone big is getting fired. Now it may not be Ryan Day, but Jim Knowles, I hope he got a lot of guaranteed money.
All right, so I just looked up Ohio State's draft prospects on PFF. And the only guy they list in their secondary is Denzel Burke. And their note on Denzel Burke is he regressed as a sophomore, allowing 110 passer rating when targeted. So they're just like shoveling Ohio State players into this for no reason. So their secondary doesn't really seem to be heavy on draftables. They got a couple of guys who are rotational defensive linemen who might bust out, and then they have a couple of 5-star edges, and then Pro Football Focus massively overrates Tommy Eichenberg. So,
I mean, he can play. He's not an NFL player, but he can play.
He's all right, but I mean, tough Borland too. I think it's just you look at that, and Ohio State went into that game saying we can't play Michigan straight up. And when's the last time that happened? Like, we can't. If we try to play these guys like we played everybody else, we're just going to get gashed. So we got to be incredibly in your face, and
they got gashed anyway.
1900, right? So, right, Craig.
Yeah.
You guys are writing about it. Yeah.
Yep. So it'll be interesting. I mean, the next battleground, these two corners. I mean, it brings everything into focus about what you've laid out, Brian, about how bad, how mismanaged or miscoached they were. Was that going to show up tangibly in recruiting? These are the test cases right here, because you have every advantage. These are in-state guys. One comes from an Ohio State stronghold. The other one comes from a huge Ohio State family. He told me, he said, man, when I said I was going to visit Michigan, it's Aaron Scott. My dad said, you're going to go on that visit without me. I'm not going on that. Now he eventually came. This was at the beginning. Yeah. He eventually came on the visit with him, and was giving Michigan their due. But that's the kind of hill that you have to climb with both of these guys. And if you lose one, or God forbid, from Ohio State perspective, both, hell, someone might get fired before the season for that. That, and they need those guys would play early at that spot. Oh man,
yeah, and
big.
I mean, you got DJ Turner going in the second round, and DJ Turner was not a big recruit, and Ben Herbert, as you said, fixed him. And I think that's something that both those guys might be looking at too, where it's just like, I know Ohio State's got a good S&C program, but if I have a problem, like, we have evidence that this can get fixed. And, just in terms of like, what did Will Johnson look like after a season of Clinkscale's coaching? Like, that guy took off. Right. And now he's projected as one of the best corners in the country as a true sophomore. And like, do you get the same vibe from the coaching that's going on at Ohio State in the secondary? I do not, personally. Not something I'm catching a waft of coming off the Ohio State secondary. So, sometimes those super offensive games where they're up 49-0 against Michigan State at halftime can conceal some issues that you're having, because at that point backups are in everywhere, because it's like, this is not a contest anymore, and like, what happens in crunch time? Well,
they're built very well to destroy everyone who's less talented than them, and that's worked so well for them that like that's who they are now, right? Like, as long as Michigan did not have the talent of Ohio State, there was nobody really to stop Ohio State. Once in a while they get into a game with Maryland or something, right? But they would just waltz their way to the Big Ten championship by having better players, and they could run what they ran by having better players. And that's what shocked them, is that Michigan finally had, in 2021, they had the same caliber, or close to the same caliber of player on the field as Ohio State. And they're not used to having that. They didn't know. And like Brian said, they changed their defense. They went to this insane defense because they didn't have another plan. They looked at Michigan's front and they said, they got Oluwatimi and they got Zinter, and we don't have an answer for that.
Well,
and
I mean,
yeah.
So to me, this is, I mentioned this on the podcast that we did after the Ohio State game. It feels for the first time in a long time that Michigan is sort of ahead of Ohio State in the meta game, because Michigan brings in Don Brown, right? And Don Brown has some really good defensive performances against guys like JT Barrett. And Michigan can't quite get those done, but it's like, okay. And then Ohio State just pops out Dwayne Haskins out of nowhere, and all of a sudden they're running an NFL passing scheme against Don Brown, and they're putting up 84 points in a game. And now Michigan responds by basically importing various Ravens defensive coordinators, and Ohio State responds to Michigan's offense by bringing in a Big 12 defensive coordinator who's had a very mediocre career, except for catching fire for a couple years with a 3 safety defense in the Big 12 at Oklahoma State. And to me, that's not the person to bring in, right? The person to bring in is probably Jim Leonard.
Oh yeah,
Jim Leonard or Phil Parker at Iowa. If you can pry him away, like, those guys are putting up defenses with far less talent than Ohio State. They're familiar with the Big Ten, and they know how to deal with a power rushing game. And I just question whether Jim Knowles is up for this, because it's one thing to, have the defensive coordinator experience that you have. He's been at various places that aren't Big 12 places, but really the only outstanding success he's had has been shutting down run and gun Big 12 attacks. So he looks at Michigan's offense and he's like, okay, we got to scheme some stuff up here. And that puts extra pressure on your defense to execute because that's not what you did all year. And Michigan was clearly preparing for Ohio State. This is the second straight year where this juggernaut offense has put up, 24 and 27 points. So Michigan is building their defense all year to combat Ohio State. And you got to question
23 points.
Sorry. I'm sorry. And you got to question, why does Ohio State have to change their defense to play Michigan?
Right. Right.
Shouldn't that be what they're doing all year?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I understand keeping some stuff in the hat so that you can surprise somebody, but just the number of busts and crazy things that they were doing, I think the pressure kind of got to them at some point, especially with Lathan Ransom. I had a tennis game where I had 4 consecutive service faults, so I know what that's like.
That isn't going to happen. That's not going to keep happening.
It's going to keep happening. It's all right. But I've been there now because I was playing casual tennis. Anyway, so yeah, I think that there's possibility that Knowles is able to right the ship. But if you're looking at the kind of profile of a guy here, oh yeah, that's the kind of guy who I want thinking about beating Michigan all year. It's not him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they probably should have gotten Ryan Walters. It's too late now, but that's the guy they should have gotten.
Oh, there's no question he would have been. Oh my, yeah, that would have been a problem.
There are defensive coordinators floating around this league who would have been much better choices than a guy who managed to turn in a couple of decent years at Oklahoma State.
Craig, I want to give you an opportunity. There's only a few minutes left, but speaking of hiring coaches, I know you had some. You want to highlight Brandon Narado's hires for his staff?
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy over the Brandon Narado hire. Give Ward Manuel credit. People have been ripping on him, but I think that it was a good hire, and they brought in a couple of assistants that I think show how good his judgments are. I believe they will show that. Now I'm losing my paper. One is a guy named Deschamps. Do you know, Brian, this guy's first name? Oh yeah, Matt Deschamps. He was he played at Maine 5 years in minor league hockey, and then he was a head coach in Europe of the Salzburg Pro Bulls or Red Bulls, and they won European championships there. And then he went to the Chicago Steel and was promoted to the associate or the assistant number 2 guy at the Chicago Steel. And he's had a lot of good players there, the Fantillis, Owen Power, Brisson, Samoskevich, Moldenauer, all out of that program. And that's probably the best program in the USHL, or has been. And so having him at Michigan probably bodes well for recruiting. But I also listened to a Hockey IQ podcast with him on it, and he was super impressive. He says, I use iPads on the ice because I think providing immediate feedback for players is the way to go. And he wants the drills. He's a big tech guy, and he wants the drills to be in game-like situations and not purely abstract drills. And he thinks by using technology on the ice, he can make corrections right there, and corrections can be made right there. And listen
Rob
to
Rassi is the other guy. Yeah.
No, the other guy is Kevin Reiter.
Oh.
And Kevin Reiter is the other assistant coach. He was a goalie at Alaska Anchorage. He was the IHL goalie of the year at Fort Wayne and won the Turner Cup there. He's been on the staff for 3 national teams that won gold medals. And he's also been the last year or two the national developmental team hockey goalies coach. So he's also been at a program where Michigan recruits highly. So both of these guys are young, and they both at places where Michigan wants to recruit. And as coaches, they've been successes. So I think Brandon Narado gets big upsides on this for the assistant coaches he's brought in, as well as Rob Rassi and the remainder of the coaching staff, which is really good, I think.
Yeah, my takeaway from this is that
Mm-hmm.
Michigan isn't going to be playing in the GLA anytime soon.
Yeah, they will
Because
not.
they're going to keep
will
recruiting
not.
like they've been recruiting. Because
Yeah.
I mean, if you want connections, the Chicago Steel and the USA program are the two programs you want connections with in North America.
Gotcha.
And
Great stuff, guys. We're going to have to close it there. We could pick this up next week, by the way. In the meantime, folks, thanks for listening to another edition of the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTK The Ticket, the official voice of University of Michigan sports and